Welcome back to another edition of Bracket Science. I'm your host, Brandon Jadich. We have the busiest weekend of college basketball coming up so far this year. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, feel free to like and subscribe to be updated on college basketball throughout the entire nation, along with on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. We're going to dissect some of the massive matchups this weekend, which actually starts tonight, Friday, in a matchup between UConn, Gonzaga, and the number one and number three team in the nation matchup on Saturday, along with other top 25 matchups, many of them including the CBS Sports Classic. But before that, let's get into something real quick. A couple things happened the last couple days during finals week that are notable, that are worth talking about. Let's talk about these real quick, then we'll get into the huge weekend of college basketball. So these things all happened on Wednesday night, starting with number 8 Creighton at UNLV. Technically, it wasn't technically a home game for UNLV. It was in Nevada, called the Jack Jones Classic. And Creighton got beat by 15 against 3 and 4 Nevada, 79-64. Mountain West schools just seem to own Creighton as of right now. San Diego State beat them in the tournament last year. Now, bear in mind, that was the Elite Eight. But Colorado State beat them by 21 this year, earlier in the year, and now UNLV just blew them out. Creighton, quite frankly, does not have a great win on their schedule. They're a team who is ride or die on the three-point line. They only shot 27.6% from deep in this game. They're not going to win whenever that happens. Trey Alexander had a bad game shooting. He had only 7 points, 2 of 13 shooting, 1 of 6 from three. He needs to be a little bit better. But Caleb Boone was the story for UNLV in this game, an Oklahoma State transfer. He had 25 and 7 on an efficient 12 of 17 shooting. UNLV shot 52% from the field and 45% from the three. Very efficient game for UNLV. May have been a trap game for Creighton. Many coaches call these games trap games, where it's a game where their team is not really looking forward to it. They're looking on for a bigger game. And this may be the case for this Creighton team. They got a game against Alabama, and then Villanova, and then they travel to Marquette for the Big East. First game of the Big East and a big showdown there. Could be a trap game. UNLV is not all half bad. They beat Akron a couple days ago maybe. And Akron's a very solid basketball team. Very bad loss for Creighton, though. As a mature, very veteran team, they should not be falling victim to trap games like this. For UNLV, they take on St. Mary's on a neutral site in a game where both teams are 500. Both teams still need a lot of wins and a lot of help to have any chance of making an at-large case in the NCAA tournament. Good win for the Runnin' Rebels there. Bad win for the Blue Jays. UNLV beat up on Creighton. But the biggest game of the night, the shockingest game of the night, Northwestern hosting Chicago State. I don't even know what to say about this game. Northwestern was 23.5-point favorites, a game that I didn't even put on our Twitter or Facebook as a game to watch of the night. It should have been a blowout. Chicago State came in on the year 3-9, and Chicago State beat them 75-73 on Northwestern's home court, on the same court where Northwestern took Purdue to overtime and beat Purdue. There were no fans at the game. I understand it's finals week, but it's just a game that wasn't very appealing. It's not a game that Northwestern should ever lose. Wesley Cardette Jr. had a huge night for Chicago State. He had 30 points on 13 of 19 shooting, and he was too much for Northwestern to handle, honestly. It's a horrible loss for Northwestern, obviously. It's certainly something that will come up come March in hope of receiving an at-large tournament bid. But how about Chicago State? Can't help but be happy for them. A great win for this program. In 2020, they started off the year 0-9, and they just canceled the rest of the season. And this was prior to COVID. They didn't cancel it because of COVID. They were just so bad. They were the worst Division I basketball team in the nation. Now, 3 years later, they travel into Northwestern and beat a ranked opponent on the road. What a journey for Chicago State. Shout out to their coach, Gerald Gillian, for rebuilding this program and getting that identity building win right here. Good win for Chicago State. Horrible loss for Northwestern. We'll see how much that affects them going forward. Another game that was at 10 o'clock at night, so not a lot of people caught it. It was on ESPN Plus. It was Utah State at Santa Clara, battle of two mid-major schools. But a big game. Both teams have had solid seasons so far. Utah State currently is one of our next four out in our bracketology. But Utah State picked up a win 84-82 in Santa Clara. That's a big win in hopes for Utah State getting an at-large bid. This game may go a long way come March, come the selection committee. Santa Clara now drops to 7-4 on the year, but they have beat some good teams. Utah State now 10-1, a very good start for this Utah State team. And the final notable game was Auburn beat up on UNC Asheville, a good UNC Asheville team too, may I remind you, 87-62 in a blowout affair there. All right, now that that's over with, let's move on to tonight. This starts the great weekend ahead with number 5 UConn and number 10 Gonzaga. This is a rematch of last year's Elite Eight game where UConn just blew out Gonzaga. UConn was blowing everyone out last year. They beat them 82-54 in the Elite Eight last year. They're obviously very different teams, both UConn and Gonzaga. They lost their 2 top scorers, Sanogo, the most outstanding player in the Final Four last year, and Drew Timme, obviously, is now gone. The game's played in Seattle. It's technically a neutral site game, but it's more of a home game for Gonzaga, looking to get their revenge on UConn. But let's talk a little bit about both of these teams and how they match up against each other. UConn's 9-1 on the year. Their lone loss was at Kansas in a tough environment. Not a bad loss at all. They're currently 4th overall at KenPom. And for those who don't know what they do over there at KenPom, it rates teams based on their efficiency every year, offense, defense. It includes just about everything. And UConn is 3rd in the nation offensively and 15th defensively. Very put together team. They have who I believe is the best point guard in college basketball right now in Tristan Newton. He's averaging 17 points, 7 rebounds, 6 assists. Tyler Kolek was the Big East preseason player of the year. I now see Tristan Newton as being the favorite. Tyler Kolek still very good, but I think Tristan Newton is the best point guard in college basketball. The good news, UConn picked up that win 10 days ago against North Carolina in the Jimmy V Classic, which should prepare them pretty well for this team, another top 10 team. The bad news, Gonzaga is about as polar opposite of a team as North Carolina as there literally can be. Normally, Gonzaga teams under Mark Few are very good offensively and not great defensively, and this might rely more on Drew Timme than Mark Few. Drew Timme, very good offensive player, wasn't great defensively. But this year, they're a very well-balanced team. They're 17th in offense at KenPom and 18th in defense at KenPom. Very different from the teams that Gonzaga has had over the last couple of years. They're a more balanced team. They have 5 players averaging in double figures this year. Going down that list, let's just show off how balanced they are. Got my notes pulled up right here. Graham Ike, he leads them at 14.2 points per game. Antoine Watson has 13.9. Nolan Hickman averages 12.6. Ryan Nembhard 11.8, and Brandon Huffs adds 11.7 per night, and not a lot of playing time for Brandon Huffs. He's been a very good addition for this Gonzaga team. Gonzaga's point guard, who we just mentioned, Ryan Nembhard, who's averaging 11.8 points per game. He spent the last 2 years at Creighton, so he's very familiar with Tristan Newton and knows how good he is. It'll be interesting to see how he plays him. He has knowledge about Tristan Newton, how to play him, how to defend him. Tristan Newton has also gotten much better this year. He's made a big step. Gonzaga, quite frankly, I believe, has the size advantage in this game. UConn, not a small team by any means, especially with Donovan Clingan at 7'2", but Gonzaga is very big. Antoine Watson and Graham Ike are both big bodies. This is a great matchup. 2 very just well-coached, put-together teams. Gonzaga's coming in on the year 8-2 on the year, with their lone loss coming to Purdue back in Maui Invitational and Washington last week. Not a great loss there. They did lead by 10 at halftime, and they ended up getting beat in that game. So we'll see how they rebound after that. Gonzaga has yet to pick up a ranked win this year, but they've beaten a few solid opponents. They beat UCLA, USC, Syracuse, teams that were supposed to be good that, quite frankly, have not been that good this year. But I'm very excited for this matchup tonight. It'll be a great one on ESPN2. 2 very well-coached teams. This can be one of those games where you watch it and you're like, that is a good basketball game. Check that out, ESPN2, 10 o'clock Eastern time tonight, though. That's kind of a late one for them. Luckily for everyone, it is Friday, so stay up, watch this game. It'll be a good one. Let's move on to the biggest day of college basketball of the year so far. It feels like Christmas morning. Feels like Christmas Eve right now. Some people believe Christmas their favorite day of the year, Thanksgiving, their birthday. Put December 16th on this list. Put it in the Apple calendar as a national holiday. I might not sleep tonight. I'm so excited, just like Christmas Eve. We have the biggest slate of college basketball starting at 12 o'clock tomorrow. Plenty of solid games. At 12 o'clock is LSU and Texas, Miami, LaSalle, a few notable games. But the first game we really want to talk about, everyone's talking about it. Number 1 Arizona taking on number 3 Purdue, starting at 4:30. Purdue favored by 2.5 as of right now. This game is on Peacock, that new Big Ten media deal with Peacock. So if you don't have a Peacock subscription, get one. This game is going to be great. Both teams lost in the first round last year. Something to remember there. Arizona got beat by Princeton. Purdue, obviously, that big loss to Fairleigh Dickinson. And now we're saying it's the biggest game of the year so far. So obviously how things have changed going on there. The game's in Indianapolis, which is a huge advantage for the Boilermakers, obviously, being from Indiana. Expect them to have a huge crowd over there. They're definitely going to have the crowd advantage. But the matchup everyone wants to see is Zach Edey and Oumar Ballo. Zach Edey is without a doubt the best player in college basketball. He's having a better year this year than he did last year. And last year he was the player of the year by a mile. He's averaging 24.8 points per game this year, which is up from last year, but 10.8 rebounds, which is down. Still 6th in the nation right now at 10.8 rebounds. Oumar Ballo will be the toughest matchup he's faced so far. Ballo is also huge. I think he's 7 foot, 260, 265, and he's muscular. He's very physical down low. Arizona can also bring in Matijos Krivas off the bench, who's 7'2", 260. He's a freshman. He's very inexperienced against especially someone like a Zach Edey, who is so talented, so good. But expect Ballo and Krivas. Ballo will obviously get more minutes. He's their guy. But bringing in Krivas when Ballo gets tired, which he is bound to do against Zach Edey, this is going to be a great matchup down low. They're almost matching his Zach Edey 7'4", but 7 foot, 7'2". They're one of the few teams that have been able to match Zach Edey in his height. But the question coming into the game, and just about every game for Purdue, it seems, is their guard play. Braden Smith has been good as of late. That's about it, though. In my opinion, Arizona has a huge advantage when it comes to the guard play in this game. Caleb Love, Kylan Boswell, Pelle Larson. I just think they're better basketball players than any of Purdue's guards. I think they're more talented. To me, this seems like an absolutely perfect matchup for Arizona. They're one of the few teams in the country that can match Zach Edey's height and physicality, along with having a huge advantage in the guard play. They're so balanced in their scoring. Caleb Love is leading them with 14.1 points per game. Good to see Caleb Love playing well again. When I was looking up their stats, there's something that we always talk about how balanced this team is, and it seemed fake. Their next leaders in scoring per game, it goes Keshad Johnson. He's averaging 12.6. Oumar Ballo's 12.5. Kylan Boswell, 12.4. And guess what? Pelle Larson, 12.3. Great balance from this Arizona team. They kind of remind me a lot of that UConn team from last year. They also have a 7'2" big man coming off the bench in Krivas, just like UConn did with Donovan Clingan last year. Krivas only plays 15.5 minutes per game, but he leads their team in blocks at 1.3 points per game, or blocks per game. Very similar to UConn last year. They just seem to have that team like just greatness about them. That's the only way to put it. They work together so well. They all know their role. They're all scoring. This team seems so deep, just like that UConn team was last year. I, without a doubt, have Arizona the favorite winning the NCAA tournament right now. But going back to Arizona and Purdue, just to show how good of a matchup this is, they're the only two teams in the nation who are ranked in the top 10 in both offensive efficiency and defensive efficiency at KenPom. Now, this is going to be interesting because Zach Edey strictly has not been really tested yet, if I can say that. They've played a great schedule, don't get me wrong, but he hasn't seen the builds of Krivas and Oumar Ballo. He obviously saw Iguodaro and a couple of other big guys in the Maui Invitational. But this is going to be a great matchup. As I said, if you don't have a Peacock subscription, go get one. It's going to be worth it. It's going to be well worth it. find out our pick for this game later in the podcast when we do our new best bet and our pick'em segment. Check that out later, coming up here in just a couple minutes. But let's move on to another game that is kind of flying under the radar, believe it or not, with two blue bloods at 5:30 in the CBS Sports Classic taking place in Atlanta. We have North Carolina, number 9 team in the country, taking on the number 14th seed, number 14 team in the country, the Kentucky Wildcats. Catch this on CBS, obviously the CBS Sports Classic. Normally, this would be just the game of the day, game of the week. Two blue bloods. They're being outshined by Purdue and Arizona, but this is still going to be a good one. Get that YouTube TV split screen up. At least this game's on cable TV. I take that back. You can't even watch it on the split screen. Purdue and Arizona on Peacock, unfortunately. Go buy another TV, set it up right next to it. This has become almost a rivalry game, this North Carolina-Kentucky game, after that crazy game of March Madness. I think it was the Elite Eight, maybe Sweet 16, with Malik Monk going off and Luke May hitting that iconic buzzer beater to win the game 83-81. But on to this year, both teams are entering the game 7-2, and these teams are very similar, if you ask me. This is a very North Carolina favored by 1 right now. I see it as a pick'em game. It's so 50-50. They're two of the most talented teams in the country. That's without a doubt. Being a blue blood, they're so fast. Both teams very big. This is North Carolina's first game after that loss to UConn, which should be an advantage coming in. They played a very disciplined Dan Hurley team. And RJ Davis has just been spectacular all year. He's averaging 21 a game, but he'll be up against very fast guards in Kentucky. We've talked about Kentucky's speed all year. They're so fast. Expect Rob Dillingham to have a big role guarding RJ Davis tonight. And Kentucky just got back Aaron Bradshaw 2 games ago, and he's already making a pretty big impact. He's 7-1. He is massive. He's a freshman. He had a double-double his second career game against Penn. He did play in that game against UNC Wilmington where they got beat, but he will have his money's worth tomorrow against Armando Bacot in North Carolina. The Kentucky team is very deep. We talk a lot about Reed Sheppard, but they are very inexperienced. They seem to rely on Reed Sheppard a little too much. They have a lot of star freshmen, a lot of star players in general. Their leading scorer, it fluctuates back and forth. It is still Antonio Reeves as of right now. He's averaging almost 18 a game. Everyone else, it goes back and forth. It's been Reed Sheppard a few times. He's averaging 13, 4, and 6 on the year. There's just not much you can say about this man and how good he has been. He was under everyone's radar coming in. He is now probably the most important freshman in the nation. Kentucky does have 6 players averaging in double figures, and they're going to need every single one of them to play well in this game. They can't just rely on Reed Sheppard to beat this very talented North Carolina team. I'm excited for this game. 5:30 on CBS. In the second game of the CBS Sports Classic, we'll talk about the first game here in a little bit. So those two are without a doubt the games of the day: Arizona and Purdue, and North Carolina and Kentucky. Let's move on to a bunch of other games to get you through your Saturday, and they are still some massive ones. Starting at 12:30, the first really big game of the day, number 2 Kansas visits Indiana on CBS. Kansas favored by 5.5 right now. They're coming off that good win against Missouri, while Indiana's coming off that horrible loss against Auburn where they just got blown out. Indiana is 7-2 on the year. So you would think, you look at their points scored and their points allowed, you think, man, maybe they're averaging about 80 points a game, 68 points allowed. Now they're averaging 74.3 points per game and giving up an average of 73.1. Very little disparity there for a 7-2 team. Shows they're getting blown out. They got blown out against Auburn, blown out against UConn, and their wins have not been blowout wins. They're definitely not the team we expected coming in. We thought that they were going to be very talented. We'll see if they put it together. The addition of Kel'el Ware hasn't worked out so far. I mean, they're 7-2, but as of right now, I have them outside the tournament, especially after that blowout loss to Auburn. Whenever Indiana and Mike Woodson's team seems to play a team that's a little bit more physical than them, they just seem to back down. They don't seem to have that heart that they need. This is a perfect opportunity against Kansas. They will, without a doubt, get a lot of physicality from Kansas. Indiana's 2 leading scorers are Kel'el Ware and Malik Reneau, but they'll have to go up against 2 massive monsters from Kansas in Hunter Dickinson and KJ Adams. This being the case, Hunter Dickinson could find some trouble with Khalil Ware. He's one of the best shot blockers in the nation. He is so lengthy, he's so long, and he's pretty quick for his 7 foot frame there. And we know Assembly Hall is going to be rocking in Indiana against the number 2 team in the nation. His team matched up last year in the Lawrence, and Kansas blew them out, quite frankly. But this Indiana team lost Jalen Hood Scafino and Trace Jackson Davis, a very different roster. Still have Trey Galloway there. This will be, I like it's going to be a tough environment, but I do believe Kansas is just a much better team. This Indiana team's been unfortunately a little bit disappointing this year, but we'll see how they do going into Big Ten play. They have a perfect opportunity here. Only 5.5 point underdog, so we'll see what they can do in this game. But let's move on to another Big 12, Big Ten matchup game. Number 6 Baylor at Michigan State, struggling Michigan State on Fox. Baylor 4.5 point favorites against a 4-5 Michigan State team. This game's at 2 o'clock. Baylor is undefeated as of right now. Michigan State's lost 3 of their last 4. They need a win so bad for their confidence and especially for any hope at an at-large resume. Baylor has been very steady. They've played a pretty weak schedule. They're 9-0, as we said. They have very balanced scoring, 6 players averaging in double figures. Freshman Jacoby Walter and transfer from Toledo, Ray J. Dennis, have been great so far. They're both averaging over 14 a game. Baylor is currently 5th overall at KenPom, but they are about as offensively biased team as you can find, other than probably Alabama. They're 2nd in the nation offensively and 43rd defensively at KenPom. Now let's talk a little bit about Michigan State and how bad they have been struggling. The question is obviously who will help Tyson Walker. Tyson Walker is very good. He's averaging over 20 points a game, but his teammates just have not picked up the slack for him. For a team that was preseason number 4-5 right now. Not to nitpick anyone, but AJ Hoggard is just a prime example. He averaged 13 points a game last year, and only averaging 10 points per game this year, and he's shooting only 38% from the floor, 25% from 3. He was supposed to be one of their stars coming in, very experienced team. Their big man, Sissoko, has also been pretty disappointing for the Spartans. He's only averaging 4.4 points per game and 5.3 rebounds per game. The good news for Michigan State, this is the perfect game to get them back on people's radars against a number 6 undefeated Baylor team who quite frankly has not faced a team as athletic as Michigan State. I'm excited for this game. We'll see how this game goes. Let's move on to a battle of Texas at 2:30. Texas A&M at number 4 Houston. This game's on ESPN2. Houston favored by 9.5 right now. This is their first real test, but they're playing a struggling Texas A&M team. Texas A&M has not looked good of great. Houston is the best defensive team in the nation, without a doubt. They are first at KenPom in efficiency. They're allowing 49.7 points per game so far this year, which is just unheard of. But with that being said, they haven't been tested too hard. They have wins over Xavier, Utah, Dayton. Their quality wins, but this A&M team is definitely more talented than any of these teams. This will be their biggest test so far. It'll be a great offensive matchup between LJ Cryer in Houston and Wade Taylor, the 4th of A&M. Even though Wade Taylor has been struggling a lot of late, he is still a gamer. He struggled shooting the ball all year, quite frankly. He's 37% field goal percentage and 25% from 3. He's still averaging 17 points per game. He's their most important player. We'll see how he does against this stifling Houston defense. Expect Jamal Sheed to be guarding Wade Taylor throughout the game. He comes into the game averaging 2.6 steals per game. So that's something to look forward to there. A great matchup. A&M has lost 3 of their last 5. Those 3 losses have come against good teams. They've been fighting some health problems as well. They've come against Memphis, Virginia, and Florida Atlantic. We'll see if they can rebound against who is currently ranked the number 1 team overall at KenPom in Houston. We'll see how that game goes. Another game that is flying under the radar, 3 o'clock, Clemson, number 13 team in the nation, visits Memphis Penny Hardaway squad. A game that it's on ESPN Plus. There's a lot of bowl games going on, a lot of good basketball games going on. This feels a little disrespectful to both of these teams. Both teams are very good. Clemson's 9-0 on the year, in fact, and Memphis is 7-2. Their only losses coming to undefeated Ole Miss and Villanova in the championship of the Battle for Atlantis. Memphis has looked better of late, though. They had that road win at VCU in overtime and that road win at Texas A&M, which was a huge win for Penny Hardaway's squad. Matchup of the game will, without a doubt, be PJ Hall and David Jones. Give me a vote in the ACC Player of the Year. If the season ended right now, I'm giving it to PJ Hall without a doubt. He's averaging 20.1 points, 7.6 rebounds, and 2.3 blocks. But the most impressive thing about him is his shooting percentage, 55% from the floor and 41% from three. Don't think he's just a layup guy. He spreads the floor. He is so good. They picked up Joe Girard from Syracuse last year, and he has been a huge addition. He's averaging 15 points per game. He's shooting 44% from three. Another team that is very reliant on the 3-point shot, but PJ Hall down low and Ian Shiflin down low. This team is still very good, even if they're not making threes. Let's talk about Memphis a little bit. Their best player is David Jones. He's also matching PJ Hall with 20.1 points per game and 6.6 rebounds, and a great defender with 2.4 steals. Very solid for a forward there. I think Memphis is the more athletic team. Clemson's the more put together team. It's in Memphis. This is about as 50-50 of a game as I can see. I can't wait to watch this. Memphis right now is favored by 2. I expect that line to even get down a little lower. I think it might end up a pick'em game. This will be a great game to watch. Check that out on ESPN Plus at 3:00. Now let's move on to the pregame of the North Carolina-Kentucky game in the CBS Sports Classic. Not as big a matchup, still a big matchup. It's at 3:00. It's Ohio State taking on UCLA in Atlanta, just like the Kentucky-North Carolina game. It's on CBS for the CBS Sports Classic. Ohio State and UCLA both coming off a loss. Ohio State at Penn State, very disappointing loss there. They blew that 18-point second half lead there, and UCLA lost at a struggling Villanova. Both teams are desperately in need of a win. Ohio State is 8-2 on the year, while UCLA is only 5-3. I do have Ohio State in the tournament right now as a 7 seed. UCLA not even in the first 4 out or next 4 out. They're out of the tournament for me as of right now. I think Ohio State is the much better team. I think they're better coached in Chris Holtmann. He deserves a lot of respect. I believe this Ohio State team will win as long as they handle Adem Bona. Ohio State's very good offensively. UCLA is very good defensively. Ohio State is currently 14th in offense at KenPom. Bruce Thornton, if you don't know his name, he is a stud for Ohio State. He's averaging 18.5 points per game. UCLA is a very bad offensive team, which we saw against Villanova, but still 21st in defense at KenPom. They also just slowed the game down a lot, so that really helps. This should be a good matchup. Two very well-coached teams, historic programs. Chris Holtmann, I like Mick Cronin. I think Chris Holtmann just does a fabulous job, though. He's a very good basketball coach if he can get that recruiting going. Ohio State will be back at the top for the Big Ten. Let's move on to the final game that is worth really noting on Saturday. It is at 8:00, so a little bit of a breather for people there, but we'll go over some under the radar games. 8:00, Alabama at number 8 Creighton. Creighton favored by 5, and this game is also on Fox. And this game may be the most fun game to watch that you will be able to watch. It is going to be an absolute shootout. The first team who scores 100 may win this game. Alabama is averaging 93.2 points per game, which is insane. Their defense is obviously very bad, though. And Creighton is averaging 84.5 points per game. And both teams very heavily rely on 3-point shooting. Both teams are coming off losses. Expect them to come out firing. Alabama came off that loss against Purdue, where they hung in there with them very well. Mark Sears had a huge game. Creighton is coming off their bad loss against UNLV, which we just talked about. Alabama in that game against Purdue took 46 threes. Creighton took 29 against UNLV. This is going to be an entertaining game to watch. And quite frankly, they're two very good basketball teams. Alabama is number 1 in offense at KenPom right now. Not very good at defense, let's be honest, but they're looking to get a good win here against a struggling Creighton team after that loss on UNLV. Alabama's led by Mark Sears. He had that huge game against Purdue where he had 35 points. He's averaging 21.4 on the season, but his 3-point shooting has been incredible. He's shooting 51% from 3. That'll be something to watch, see how many he takes. I think he took 18 against Purdue. He's just going to be firing them up left and right. He'll be guarded by Creighton's Trey Alexander, who is a very good defender on this Creighton squad. Bailey Shireman and Ryan Kalkbrenner of Creighton. They're both very big bodies just in general. Baylor Shireman, 6'7" guard. Kalkbrenner, 7'1", playing the center role. This will play a good role against this Alabama team, whose height fluctuates a little bit. They'll have to rely on Grant Nelson, Jaron Stevenson, just to match Creighton's height. Two bit of role players. But this game's going to be excellent to watch. It's going to be a shootout. Tune in at 8 o'clock on Fox to watch this incredible game. Let's talk about a few more games just quickly, under the radar games that they're not at the level that these games we just talked about. But starting at 12 o'clock, it's LSU at number 19, Texas. LSU, not very good. Texas, very disappointing as of late. Haven't really beaten anyone. This game's on ESPN2. At 4 o'clock is Florida Atlantic versus St. Bonaventure. Big game for the American Athletic Conference. This is on ESPNU. 7 o'clock, Dayton travels to Cincinnati, only about 20 minutes to Cincinnati. Very close schools there. That's on ESPN+. At 10 o'clock, North Carolina State visits Tennessee on ESPN2, Dalton Connect and Tennessee. And also at 10 o'clock is Arizona State at TCU on ESPNU. This will be a very good slate of games all day. Tune into ESPN, Fox, CBS. There's going to be games everywhere all day. I'm so excited. Let's take a little breather here, and then let's get back to our best bets for Saturday. We have our parlay of the day. We have our pick'em, our new segment we're introducing where we are picking every single game that is worth mentioning.
Let's start with our Pick'em segment where we were going to pick every game we talked about today. We hope everyone does the same thing. Let's start with the game tonight, UConn and Gonzaga. UConn favored by 4.5, and give me UConn minus 4.5. I think the Huskies are too much for Mark Few's Gonzaga team. Moving on to tomorrow, Arizona and Purdue. Purdue favored by 2.5. Give me Arizona plus 2.5. Give me Arizona money line. I think they win the game. North Carolina favored by 1 against Kentucky. Give me Kentucky plus 1. Kansas at Indiana. Kansas favored by 5.5. Give me Kansas minus 5.5. Baylor at Michigan State. Baylor favored by 4.5, but give me Michigan State plus 4.5. I think Tom Izzo gets his team back on board and they pull through a big win against Baylor. Texas A&M plus 9.5 at Houston. Give me A&M plus the points. I think this is too many points for an in-state game. Give me the Aggies. Clemson at Memphis in the Battle of the Tigers. Memphis minus 2. Give me Memphis minus 2 in a 50-50 game here. I think Memphis just out-athleticizes Clemson, but this is a very close affair. Ohio State and UCLA. Ohio State favored by 1.5, and give me the Buckeyes minus 1.5. I think Chris Holtman's squad, too much for this poor UCLA team. Alabama at Creighton. Creighton favored by 5, but give me Alabama plus 5. I think they pull through this game and pick up a much-needed win. Moving on to our under-the-radar games. No lines out yet for these games, so we'll just give them to you money line. LSU at Texas. Give me Texas without a doubt. LSU, not great. Texas also not looking great, but they are better than LSU. Give me the Longhorns. Florida Atlantic and St. Bonaventure. Closer than you'd think, but give me Florida Atlantic. Dayton at Cincinnati in another crosstown game for Cincinnati, this time at home, so I will be taking Cincinnati. North Carolina State at Tennessee. Give me Tennessee without a doubt. They should be favored by more than 10 points tomorrow. Give me Tennessee. Arizona State at TCU, and give me Arizona State going into TCU and beating them. I'm taking Arizona State. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. As always, hit the like and the subscribe button if you're on YouTube. Give us a follow on Spotify and now Apple Podcasts. Check us out on Twitter at Bracket Science with 2 S's and on Facebook at Bracket Science. Also check out our new blog page, bracketscience.weebly.com. We post just about everything on there. We have our bracketology on there, everything in the news world for college basketball. Everything will be posted on our blog. As always, thanks to all our listeners. Hope everyone has a great weekend and enjoyed this wonderful slate.